Even though a lot of them were super basic, I really enjoyed talking about the non-playable characters in Street Fighter V. They're all a bit shit for the most part, but I don't know, they're kinda charming in a weird way. So, once I was done talking about them, it only made sense that I'd eventually talk about the non-playable boss characters. There's two main reasons that I'm only getting around to the boss characters now, and the first is that, for the longest time, I didn't actually have a way to play as all of them. The only reason I'm able to play as the boss version of Geef is thanks to a recent mod released by Killbox. Make sure to check them out, they're the main guy behind Mysterious Mod, and they're an extremely talented SF5 modder. The other reason I'm only talking about them now is that, unfortunately, I just don't think they're that interesting for the most part. A bit of a running theme the boss characters in Street Fighter V have is that they've like one or two really cool looking things, and then the rest of their kit is just kind of eh. For example, Shadow Nash has this really cool looking down forward heavy kick launcher. It does look pretty cool, but unfortunately in practice it's just boring. Look at my inputs here. The air combo just comes out automatically on hit, and there's no kind of creativity or custom combo potential. That's just what you get. It's not even great as a combo ender because it's got like no juggle potential. Nowhere near as cool in practice as it looks. In a weird way, I feel like the Master, or Boss Ryu, kind of perfectly proves my point while still being a pretty interesting character. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, like sort of an oxymoron I guess, but here's the thing. This character does have interesting stuff, but most of it is under the hood, kind of like ASREX, where they had a very basic toolkit, but they had a lot of interesting characteristics, like taking extra hit stun. Master Ryu is sort of the same. He's got interesting stuff under the hood, but his toolkit is not the most interesting thing in the world. I'll talk about Master Ryu's unique traits first, and then we'll discuss his individual moves later. For a start, this character is an absolute fucking tank. Boss Geef's heavy SPD does 300 damage and 150 stun. But it sure doesn't fucking look like it against this character. Master Ryu has 1500 health and 2000 stun, and there's no kind of unique downside to balance this out. It's insane. On top of his insane health and stun, it's also impossible to counter hit him. The only way you can land a counter hit against this character is by forcefully turning counter hits on in training mode. And while it's technically not a counter hit, Alex's V-Skill 1 still works as intended. The Master's Throw is the stuff of nightmares. It does 200 damage, 200 stun, cannot be teched, and is frame 1. You also get a throw loop, and why you get a throw loop is disgusting. The range on this is absolutely ludicrous. You can also input throw with forward medium punch, back medium punch, forward heavy punch, back heavy punch, or back heavy kick. It's a cute reference, but I'm not entirely sure why you'd actually do it. Back throw does the same damage and stun, but if the opponent quick rises it, you're -2. The Master also has insanely high meter build. They're very strong, but this character's combos are not very long or complex, but despite that, you can easily build close to or over a full bar in a single combo. This is really good because he has no EX moves, and the only thing he can spend his meter on are his 2 supers, one of which costs 2 bars. Master Ryu also has incredibly high chip damage. You wouldn't think it, but that entire thing was a true block string. On top of that, notice how I started with 2 bars, spent 2 bars on the super, and still ended up with a bar and a half. His high chip damage and amazing meter build work extremely well together. Speaking of meter, let's talk about what the character can do with his V meter. A lot of boss characters just can't do anything with it. And while Boss Ryu doesn't have a V-trigger, he does have this. Pressing Heavy Punch and Heavy Kick gives you a slightly different version of his V-trigger 2 parry. It has a few key differences from his V-trigger 2 parry, but overall I'd say it's much better. The only real downside is that it does 50 less damage and no stun instead of 200. Due to the lack of EX Donkey Kick, you don't have any 1-bar follow-ups, but this almost doesn't matter. You have a really strong 2-bar follow-up, and a successful parry into Light Shoryuken builds like 90% of a bar. It's actually ridiculous. It's also active on frame 1, while Ryu's normal V-trigger 2 parry is active on frame 2. Here I do a -7 on block move into parry, while Guile does a frame 8 attack. Ryu's normal V-trigger 2 parry loses here. It's also got extremely low recovery. It's insane. If it didn't cost a bar of V-meter, you'd just go for this all the time. Which, funnily enough, you can do, because his V-skill parry is the exact same. His V-skill parry is just an insane version of his normal V-skill parry. It's got like no recovery, is also active on frame 1, and of course you've got a massive frame 1 active throw to follow it up with. The Master doesn't have a V-shift, but he does have a V-reversal, although there's nothing that spectacular about it. The only differences are 20 more damage and the fact that it does normal damage instead of grade damage. While having a frame 1 parry is really good, it's still going to lose to throws. That's where backdash comes in. Master Ryu's backdash is immune to throws and strikes on frame 1, and of course, because he's immune to them, it's not counter-hit punishable. That's pretty much it for the unique attributes this character has, and for the most part they're incredibly strong. I'm going to move on now to individual moves, and I think it makes sense to start with the move that most people know this character for. Shin Shoryuken. This is the only move that's completely unique to the Master Ryu, and yeah, it's pretty cool. It's not the best looking Shin Shoryuken, but it's nice to see it in Street Fighter V nonetheless. A clean hit Shin Shoryuken does 450 damage, and if you hit it at a specific range or too early as an anti-air, you get a weaker version that does 280. There's a few specific scenarios where regardless of range, you can only juggle the weak version. In these situations, Shinku Hadouken does the exact same damage for less meter, so just go for that. It's also extremely fast at frame 2, so there's a few scenarios where it's the only thing you can combo into. After your forward medium punch overhead on a standing opponent, you're +2, so it's the only thing you can land in that scenario. Lastly, and it should come as no surprise, it's extremely unsafe on block. The Master's Shinku Hadouken is like a less powerful but way more versatile version of Ryu's vanilla Street Fighter V Super. It does 40 less damage, but again, it only costs 2 bars. Shinku Hadouken being 2 bars on a character with such good meter build does so much for this character. See, the Master Ryu has really impressive linking ability, but he can actually struggle to end combos. He only has 3 grounded specials. Shoryuken is pretty stubby. Tatsu whiffs on crouches. And Hadouken has great range, but it's not that rewarding of an ender. That's where Shinku comes in. Hadouken is the Master Ryu's only super cancelable special move, which is super nice considering how many of his combos end in a spaced Hadouken. The damage is okay, but you don't get a knockdown, which kinda sucks. Shinku helps patch that up really nicely, especially on a character with such good meter build. The most interesting thing about this move to me is the fact that it's +10 on block. Now, it might seem a bit silly to burn a super on block, but again, it's only 2 bars and it's on a character with ludicrous meter build, so I don't know. I think it's cool nonetheless. I'll go through his lights and mediums pretty quick because there's just not a ton to talk about. They're better in a lot of small ways, like having slightly more damage, slightly less pushback, just stuff like that. One thing that's kind of interesting though is that he can now chain into his standing light kick. I did notice that his crouching light kick was -1 on block, while it's +1 on block for vanilla Ryu. But I'm not sure if that's unique to the Master Ryu, or that was just something about Ryu that was buffed in vanilla Street Fighter V. If you know, I'd love to know. I'm not sure. Again, mostly the same story with his mediums. Better frame advantage, better damage, more range. One thing that's kinda cool though is that his standing and crouching medium punch are both full frame startup now. Having a full frame medium in Street Fighter V is mostly unheard of now. The only one in the game is Kami's back medium punch, which is so shitty and stubby that it's kind of balanced around the fact that it's a full frame. His forward medium punch overhead is +6 on a crouching opponent. It's also only -1 on block, which is kind of crazy. Do remember though that if you press forward medium punch while you're close to the opponent and they're in a grabbable state, that'll happen. Which, you know, not that that's a bad thing. They took fucking 200 damage off a frame 1 throw. It's hard to be mad at that. The Master's heavies are where stuff gets interesting. His standing and crouching heavy punch do 10 more damage and 50 extra stun. Forward heavy punch does 25 less stun, but to compensate, it's 2 frames faster, has way less recovery making it +3 on block, and does 40 more damage. It looks like a great move, and on paper I guess it is, but it's not that useful because it's outclassed by another move that I'll get to in a bit. Back heavy kick just kind of exists. It has 40 more damage and 2 frames less recovery, but it can't be cancelled anymore. Sweep is completely cracked. It's frame 6, -4 on block, and has insane range. You can even special cancel it, but I don't think that's that useful. The main thing you'd want to do is to cancel into Hadouken so you can be safer, but typically that's going to make you more unsafe unless you hit the very tip. You could go into Shinku Hadouken though, which will make you plus. The Master's heavy jump in normals do 10 more damage and are way faster, meaning you can use both as instant overheads. Ryu's jump heavy kick is also now a cross-up. It's pretty beefy. Jump heavy punch is also special cancelable, which is nice, because going into light Tatsu does a ton of chip damage on block and gives a juggle to Shinku on hit. It also lets you do this on big characters. So, yeah, that exists. Now there's one more normal to talk about, but it is some absolutely insane shit, so I'm going to save it till the end of the video. We're going to move on to specials, starting with Hadouken. They're really good. They have 3 frames less startup than Ryu's normal meterless Hadoukens, the same as his EX Hadouken. From a distance, they do 100 damage and 100 stun. But up close, they do 120 damage, 150 stun, and knockdown. This is actually the best way for the Master Ryu to combo into Shin Shoryuken from mid-screen. The craziest thing about Hadouken to me though is the chip damage. From a distance they do 25, and up close they do 40. In terms of frame data, they're actually worse on block than Ryu's normal Hadoukens. His are all -6 on block point blank, while the Master's are -7, -8, and -9 respectively. However, I think the chip damage more than makes up for it. Shoryuken is the Master's most difficult to land but most rewarding ender. They're all frame 3, have much less recovery, and are way more powerful. Heavy does a massive 220 damage, while Light does 160 while giving a juggle to Shinku Hadouken anywhere, and Shin Shoryuken in the corner. All 3 of them are invincible on frame 1. All of them are significantly more safe than your typical Shoryuken. The light one is only -8 and does 60 damage of chip. If you land it a little further out, it's more unsafe, but it only hits once. So that would maybe throw off a hypothetical person trying to punish this. They're all amazing anti-airs, but strangely enough, if you land the late hit of the light Shoryuken, you can't juggle to Shinku. It only works with the early hit. Speaking of juggles, they're not very juggle friendly at all. The only juggle I found into a clean hit Shoryuken is after jump medium punch if you only get one hit. If you get both hits, you can only juggle into the second hit of heavy DP, and light and medium just whiff. Ground Tatsu is not very good. You could maybe use it for a very fake, cheesy mix-up, but I don't know. They all whiff on crouch, and while the Master Ryu does have two moves that force stand, if you ever land a crouch heavy punch, you're gonna want to go for Shoryuken. Heavy for meterless damage, and light for the juggle to super. And if you ever land a back heavy kick, you're usually out of range for light Tatsu, which is the one you want to land the most because it juggles to super. Air Tatsu is very weird. I've talked about some of the uses of the light one, but the medium and heavy ones just seem kinda dumb. Medium flies in this weird arc, and heavy turns you into the Ryucopter. These two are just kind of pointless. Medium doesn't seem to have anything over the light one, and the heavy one's just kind of inconsistent. If you juggle into the first hit, you're probably gonna be minus, and if you juggle into the last hit, you'll be a million fucking miles away from your opponent. There I got the middle one, which is the best case scenario. They do build quite a lot of meter on whiff. And that's nice, but I don't know. It doesn't build that much more than just throwing a Hadouken, so I don't see the point. All versions of Air Tatsu can cross up, although it's only really useful for the light one. One thing that's kinda cool is that if you neutral jump right in front of your opponent and delay light Tatsu, it hits in front. But if you do it earlier, it hits behind. It's kinda neat. Okay, I've saved the best for last. This is the Master's heavy kick. And it's fucking absurd. First off, it does 120 damage, 200 stun, and it's +8 on hit. That's already really good. However, it has two other changes that really push the move over the edge. For a start, it no longer whiffs on crouch, which is great. But the really scary change is that not only is it +8 on hit, but it's +8 on block. This is a frame 10 move that moves you forward and is +8 on block. Hypothetically, a lot of characters would kind of just have to eat this forever. There's only a 2-frame gap between each of those. You can't just sit there and take heavy kick forever. It does 20 chip damage on block, and you're holding down back against the character with a frame 1 200 damage untechable throw. So what are you gonna do about it? Well, if you have a frame 1 invincible move, you could try do that to break the 2-frame gap. But of course, if they just predict this and see it coming, you're in for a world of hurt. Then again, not every character has an invincible reversal outside of their super, and even the ones that do, they need to use the EX ones that are invincible in frame 1. The meterless ones that are typically invincible in frame 3 just won't cut it. What about V reversal? Well, that's no good because the Master Ryu can block in time. And while you are -2, which against most characters is safe, you're -2 against a character with a fat as fuck frame 1 throw. Now, obviously, there's a lot of V reversals that work differently, but it's still not a good spot. V-shift doesn't seem like that concrete of an answer either. If you don't do the V-shift break, then Ryu is -2. So you have the advantage, but again, he can pretty easily challenge that. And if you do the V-shift break, then you're -2 if he blocks it. And of course, you know, that's gonna happen. So how do you get out of this? I mean, a lot of the time, you just don't. There are some ways you can try and take your turn back, but they usually all involve resources, and there's probably some character-specific options, but... man, a guy pressing one button over and over should not need a fucking character-specific option to get out of. I get this is a boss character, they don't, you know, look for this shit, but it's kind of funny. The only potential downside, with downside in massive fucking quotation marks here, compared to Ryu's heavy kick, is that this one isn't a crush counter. The Master Ryu actually has no crush counters, although it doesn't really matter because it still combos into itself anyways. So that's pretty much everything I have to say about the Master or Boss Ryu, and I think he's neat. He's obviously extremely powerful, which makes sense, he's a boss character, and even though he's not that flashy, you know, like his toolkit is pretty basic even if it's very strong, I don't know, I think that works. It's a boss version of Ryu. He's a very basic character. If you made a super strong version of him, he wouldn't do these super long 99 hit combos, he'd just hit you 5 times and you'd fucking die. And yeah, they kinda hit the nail on the head.